Welcome. Very excited to share with you some context and background and the nature of our executive doctorate in business administration at Pepperdine University. As I said, I'm the academic director for the program. I'm also an associate professor of information systems and technology management here at the Graziadio School. This is my 16th year with the school, and suddenly I'm celebrating my 31st year in academia, having spent a good portion of the first half of that career at University College Dublin in Ireland. Thus the accent. So again, delighted to have you here. Let me start off with providing for you a little bit of context and background to the DBA degree and sort of why it may have emerged or why it has emerged, at least a perspective on why it has emerged within the context of educational programs designed for business managers and executives. So I borrowed this as a cover story from a Harvard Business Review. Comes from about 3 or 4 years ago, I think 2015 sometime, a cover story talking about make better decisions, clearly a call to action to the readers of Harvard Business Review, which of course will be senior executives and business managers. And the byline there, I think, is very interesting. It talks about how to outsmart your biases and broaden your thinking in that regard. And so clearly decision-making has always been a clear objective, a clear responsibility for business executives, and something that MBA programs have aimed to cultivate over time are the frameworks and analytical methods and attitudes, etc., for business managers to engage in effective decision-making across the various functional areas in business. You will also most likely be familiar with the big excitement in the last few years about big data and analytics, and even the suggestion that business today has now moved to a point where analytics and the effective use of data has now become a really important competitive differentiator for firms in that regard. And so there's something about the use of data, something about effective decision-making continues to be a really important element of the toolkit of the effective executive and the effective senior manager in business organizations. I think though beyond that, beyond decision-making itself, there's another phenomenon that has been emerging over the last almost 15 years now that was started by some colleagues at Stanford, Jeff Pfeffer and Rob Sutton, and they brought up an article in Harvard Business Review and published a book called Hard Facts. The notion here was a call to a new practice of management, which they termed evidence-based management. And this is a broader context for, I think, for a lot of the things we see happening in the last few years around this obsession with a use of large data sets and sophisticated analytical techniques for that. But I think the concept of evidence-based management goes a little broader than decision-making per se, and gets us into a broader notion that a call to action for a philosophy of management, which is really driven by solid evidence maybe in a more broader sense than data and analytics per se. And so if you look at the byline up there, there's again this notion of a tendency, perhaps among senior managers, to rely too much on intuition, on experience, on gut, and perhaps not rely enough or take enough advantage of the evidence which can be determined and can be, and the argument here should be, woven into the practice of management so as to guide organizations towards greater success in today's competitive environment. This notion of evidence-based management from that early mention in 2006 has kind of grown, and here's a book that's emerged even last year, again on the concept of evidence-based management, suggesting to executives how they might use evidence to guide organizational decision-making. And so what I'm going to suggest here is that a strong motivator for the emergence of DBA programs, doctoral programs that are the doctoral level in business administration, that build upon, go beyond the levels of analytical capabilities that are typically communicated in MBA programs, is some suggestion that there is a need for more sophisticated evidence, or executives that have a more sophisticated understanding of evidence in the context of the type of decision-making, management decision-making that's needed in today's competitive environments. And parallel to that, another article that I find relevant to our discussion here today, late last year in Harvard Business Review, a cover story that talks about the business case for curiosity, and the notion here that businesses will be better served if the executives within them adopt a sense of curiosity about what's happening in their firms and why it's happening, and curiosity about better ways to guide their firms towards improved organizational performance. So all of that, I think, for me, provides a very strong context for the emergence of doctoral programs in business administration, going beyond, as I say, the levels of education that we now have sort of found typical in MBA programs. I think from a career perspective for working executives, given now the prevalence of MBA degrees, the other part of this too that's worthwhile mentioning is the notion of a higher level of credentialing or of degree that allows business executives to differentiate themselves, to develop a more sophisticated understanding of the operating environment of their businesses, and my comment earlier, a more sophisticated understanding of good evidence that can guide decision-making in that regard. So that takes us to the Graziadio School, and so now what have been our conversations within that broader context. And I will share that for a number of years, we celebrate our 50th anniversary this year at the Graziadio School. It is primarily a graduate school of business that was formed now almost 50 years ago. In fact, we recently celebrated our 50th anniversary. And what's interesting about the Graziadio School of Business, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is that this is a school that actually started its operations serving working business professionals and working executives. Quite a different heritage to many business schools that typically start with undergrad education and then grow into full-time MBA programs, and then later on go into MBA programs and other certificate programs for working professionals. Graziadio did it a little different, as I say, starting off by offering part-time programs for working professionals and working business executives. Over the last 50 years, we've constantly considered how do we better serve that community of working professionals and executives. And what we've done over time is we've added concentrations to our MBA programs, we've added new master's levels degrees, and we've added various executive courses in specialist areas. About 10 years ago, I was part of a group that looked at whether, in fact, it was time for the Graziadio School to consider doctoral level education for business executives. We, at the time, decided that we would continue to focus on master's level education back then. But over the years, we've constantly sort of reconsidered that question and came to a decision a few years back that, in fact, this was a program for which the time had now matured. Let me share with you, first of all, though, a little bit more about sort of the mission of the school. The Graziadio School sits within Pepperdine University. Pepperdine is a Christian university, and the business school certainly seeks to adhere to and follow and be inspired by the Christian values of the university. As we pursue a mission to promote transformational learning, and that word transformational means transforming our students, transforming them professionally, but also personally as well, as a key outcome of our programs and this experiences here. We also seek to create applied knowledge. And again, that's different than many universities. Pepperdine's mission is very much practice-oriented. And the research that we've always done at the Graziadio School has sought to inform business practice, and thus the notion of applied knowledge, knowledge that can be applied immediately to business practice, research that is motivated by real problems and challenges that exist in practice, and research results that seek to inform practice. And so that's all, when we use the term applied research, what that term encapsulates is the notion of research, which is very much based in practice, motivated by practice, and seeks to inform practice. And that's very much been the type of research that we have been interested in at the Graziadio School. And then our current mission talks about equipping students to become best for the world leaders and entrepreneurs. The DBA program, and what are the features of the DBA program? As I said, we've been looking at this before launching our program last fall. We've been paying close attention to it for about 10 years beforehand. The particular trigger that caused us to actually launch the program last fall was the arrival of our current dean, Derek van Rensburg, who comes to us from a long and very successful career as an executive at Unilever and then Coca-Cola, most recently president of new ventures at Coca-Cola. Derek also had recently completed his DBA and was very much a proponent of the degree and very much believed in its importance for senior executives today as a way for them to elevate their understanding of business, elevate their analytical frameworks and toolkits, and really position themselves to be effective executives in the current competitive environment. And so you'll see here his quote about offering a higher level of qualification for accomplished executives who are looking for this combination of personal development, but also an interesting intellectual quest and developing skills and frameworks and analytical tools to help them meet today's business challenges. So against that background then, let me also say to you, before we get into the details of our degree, broader credibility for the DBA degree, in case this is something that you're saying that you've just recently heard about and you're wondering, does this degree have credibility? There is an association of business schools that are now offering a Doctorate of Business Administration degree, and there are now over 51 schools that are members of the EDBA Council, as it's known. And the council seeks to identify and sort of serve as a forum for ongoing development of DBA programs among the best DBA programs that are available today in the world. And that's certainly a website you should check out. Once you go in there, you'll notice a very strong presence by schools in Europe. And then you'll notice that this is a program that is slowly and maybe now more speedily spreading across from through the east coast of the US and spreading its way across the US to now be here at Pepperdine in California. So some features of our degree, I call these hallmarks, or sort of high-level features of our degree. The first thing I will say here is in terms of reputation. The Graziadio School, I've mentioned, has been around for 50 years, focused on working professionals and working executives. Many of our programs are ranked very highly. We are accredited by the premier accrediting body, AACSB International. And Pepperdine itself is a Carnegie classified doctoral and professional degree granting university. So all of that says that Pepperdine and the Graziadio School offer a very strong reputation to the marketplace as a provider of a DBA program. The long heritage of programs I've mentioned to you, and so we now see offering the Executive Doctorate in Business Administration as the logical next program to add to our degree program portfolio. And we also believe that the timing for us in sort of launching that program last fall really is good in terms of the strengths that we've evolved over the years and the capabilities and interests of our faculty to support this doctoral program. The second hallmark I will talk to you about is rigor. And so as you'll see later when I give you an overview of some of the faculty that are involved in the program. Our faculty come to us from all of the top research universities in the world, but again come to Pepperdine in part because they have a strong commitment to teaching and student development, but also because they have a strong commitment to an interest in applied research rather than basic or theoretical research. That said, this is a program that, while aiming to develop skills in applied research, we also realize and recognize and advocate that the research, the applied research that we are developing our students to undertake needs to be done with an appropriate level of rigor so that the results and the findings have credibility, have merit, and can stand up in the world to questioning and debate in that regard. And so the program adheres to all of the rigor one would expect in a high reputation doctoral program. But within that then as well, Pepperdine is also known over time for having a strong high level of attention to individual students. We have always kept our class sizes at the appropriate level that allow our faculty to have a meaningful interaction with our students. And that attribute we now bring also into the DBA program, and setting up a program that creates opportunities for close one-on-one interactions with world-class scholars that our faculty are to undertake research that is motivated by real-world questions and that aims to impact the real world of business and management practice. Third hallmark is relationships, and as I say, we've always had a strong orientation towards appropriate sized class cohorts that allow us to maintain strong interactions and relationships with students, and that applies to the DBA as well. And we're aiming for a cohort size of 15 to 20 students. There are in fact 15 students in this first cohort that started last September, and we will aim to continue that cohort size as we move up to the future. The cohort model allows you as participants in the program to have close connections with and interactions with your classmates. And there's this notion here of creating within each cohort a very rich and powerful think tank. This group that's going through a very rich education experience together and can really help each other dive deeply into these important questions and then join each other on journeys to explore the best answers to those questions. Our fourth hallmark here is relevance. And so the notion here again is relevant to contemporary business practice, focused on real world problems, and then seeking to develop meaningful, practical insights and solutions to those problems that are being pursued in the research. And then the last one, and you know, I've got 4 R's, so I had to find a 5th word that begin with R. I'm using the word routine, but I really mean here schedule, the sort of the cadence of the program. So, and this is really at the dean's insistence, and the dean, when he did his DBA as a senior executive, realized that one of the most difficult aspects of a DBA is the number of times that one has to try and extract oneself from your daily work responsibilities and come to class. And so he advocated very strongly for a program schedule that limited the number of visits to campus to no more than 1 per trimester. And so we've adopted that model and created a program that requires you to be on campus for 3 one-week on-campus residentials, 1 per trimester, fall, spring, and summer. Those are typically positioned in the middle of the semester. And so then we use hybrid and online sessions such as this to launch a class or course at the beginning of the semester, go through the syllabus, distribute out assigned reading, have weekly check-ins as webinars and web-based class sessions, to go through various work that prepares you for the on-campus residential. There are typically deliverables that are due before the on-campus residential. the 6 days, 6 to 7 days on campus is then a time to review those submissions, build upon them, clarify them, engage in robust debate, and then really prepare students to continue to work after they go back to their homes and places of work for the rest of the semester. And that then repeats for other semesters afterwards. The other distinctive feature of our program is that every course is focused on advancing the student towards completion of her or his doctoral dissertation research. And so all assignments that you do are specifically directed and focused upon advancing your progress towards completion of the doctoral research in that regard. So let me give you some more details here. Well, before details, stepping back from that a little bit, you saw earlier that the mission of the Graziadio School is educating best for the world leaders. And just to add that in the context of the DBA, what that really means for me is this notion of developing, educating, cultivating what we call scholar practitioners. And so what does this term mean? The concept seems to be and is a combination of the attributes of the scholar, which we have historically assumed as being an academic, merging those attributes and characteristics with the attributes of business practitioners. And so to kind of add some attributes to that, what is the nature of this scholar practitioner that we're referring to here? In my mind, scholar practitioners are individuals who have a very sophisticated understanding of and a respect for and an ability to apply a number of different things here. And so, oops, I've lost my cursor, come back. There we are. The first one is relevant theory. And so theory, I think, is a word that sometimes gets a bad rap, or a concept that gets a bad rap in business schools. One of my favorite quotes upon theory, which I believe came from Albert Einstein, who apparently said, "There's nothing more practical than a good theory." And so there is a lot of value to well-established theories, not hunches, but well-established theories, and a lot of value to the conceptual clarity that good theory can provide. And that's certainly something that we want scholar practitioners to have, and something we want to cultivate in our DBA program. The other thing is a sophisticated understanding of available data. And so again, building upon the conversations that are happening in the world about big data and analytics, that too spills over into the work we do in Executive Doctorate of Business Administration programs, helping students to develop appreciation for good data and an appreciation for appropriate analysis that can be done for particular types of data. And so one of the dangers that's happening in the world of analytics today is that ever more powerful analytical tools that are ever more easier to use can actually create a situation where people with limited appreciation of what they're doing can actually apply sophisticated tools to very large data sets. They'll find answers, but of course the big danger is that they really don't understand the essence and nuances of the answers that they're getting, and may actually be applying the incorrect analysis to less than robust data. So we really do need to develop a good understanding of all of those concepts there together. I want to say sort of the ability to derive meaningful conclusions from the analysis that has been completed is really important. The ability to reflect upon those conclusions and actually cultivate meaningful insights, insights that then can be a basis for action within business contexts. The other thing that's really powerful, really important for scholar practitioners to develop are techniques for developing better questions. Many people would argue that whereas our ability to crunch large data sets has evolved pretty significantly, a really important capability that has not received nearly as much attention is the ability to develop better questions. And that's certainly something that gets developed over the course of a DBA program. Being a more discerning consumer of answers, discerning consumer of results, of data, is another key feature of the scholar practitioner. The ability to be able to question in a constructive way the robustness of results that have been provided to decision maker or to groups of executives is a really important part. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is develop more robust insights. And all of that together then gets us to be in a position to practice what we talked about earlier as being this concept of evidence-based management. Let me move on here and get ready to share with you the nature of the program. And so my 3 pillars here are representative of the fact that what we have designed is a 3-year part-time program that is, as we said, delivered over 3 trimesters per year. So it's a 9-trimester program. On-campus residentials happen each trimester in the first 2 years, and then the 3rd year is focused exclusively on completing the doctoral dissertation research. So year 1, here's a quick synopsis of the courses that are there. We kick off in the first 2 trimesters with epistemology and theory building. That's really the philosophy of science. How is knowledge created? What is good knowledge? What are its attributes? And then the integrated research seminars are mechanisms that allow us to expose students to the world of contemporary business applied research. And we do this through 3 seminars, each of which follows a particular theme. The themes that we are currently pursuing are innovation in the 21st century, strategies for designing and leading effective organizations, and global business and economics. So those 3 seminars kick off in the fall trimester of year 1. They continue on into the spring trimester of year 2. So the current cohort are finishing up their papers, their research papers for those 3 integrated research seminars right now. The nature of those papers are actually literature reviews through each of those 3 lenses. And over the summer, they will start weaving together those 3 literature reviews into the literature review that will form the conceptual base for their dissertation research. Over summer, students will start now moving into the first of their methods classes, and they'll also undertake a research apprenticeship with a research mentor who is likely to become their doctoral dissertation advisor over the coming years. We also have a feature of our program, a DBA conference. Every year in summer, there'll be a 2-day conference which will highlight DBA research and other applied research by our faculty and external guests. So that's something that we'll repeat each year across all 3 years of the program. In year 2, we move on to more advanced research methods and also get into research design. And this is the year in which students develop their detailed proposal for their research. And some students, if they're moving along fast enough, will even start doing some preliminary data collection in the summer of year 2. And again, the DBA conference pops up there at the end of year 2. And then year 3 moves on to be exclusively focused on dissertation research. The student now at this stage in early fall should be at a stage where they are collecting data, and then into spring should be well into analyzing that data and starting to write up some results. And then in summer of year 3, you have the completion of the document, the dissertation document, which then will be defended at the end of year 3. We do allow students to submit 2 publishable research papers as an alternative format to the dissertation. So you are not required to necessarily follow the standard 5-chapter dissertation. You may, as an alternate, actually submit 2 publishable papers. And for those of you who are particularly interested in publishing, that may be a format that you are interested in. I'm going to try and flip over here to the chat window and see at this stage if there's any questions that I can see and address. And just give me 1 second here. Again, I encourage you, if you have questions, to please go to the chat window and type in your question there. So looks down, if I said 3 weeks, that was a mistake. It should be 3 years. Sorry about that, Matt. Malibu campus. Yes, all of the residential sessions are held at the Malibu campus, where we have a residential executive education facility. So there's on-campus accommodation. And so it really is a retreat type format where you arrive typically on a Sunday evening, sometimes a Saturday evening, and then it is full days all day for the 6 days that you are on campus. Let's see here. I'm going to talk about differences between a PhD and a DBA in a minute. The question about, is it directed towards executives? Yes, and we'll talk about the ideal student in a minute there, Oscar. And I'm just want to see if there's anything else on what I have covered. Someone asked about research tracks. So not that there's research tracks per se, more than research tracks, there are individual research projects. So each student gets to shape the specific research that the student wishes to complete. And that then is we actually ask you to think about that as part of the application process. We ask you to think about an area or areas of research that you think you're going to be interested in pursuing. We don't hold you to that, because what often happens with students is, and what has happened this year with students, is as they go through the integrative research seminars in the fall and spring some trimesters of their first year, as they become exposed to contemporary applied research and the literature that is articulating and communicating that research, students' interests get tweaked in entirely new areas, or they can get their direction shifted. And so it is by the end of year one that we would encourage you to put a final shape on your research project. But it is entirely customizable to the students' research interests in that regard. Ultimately, then proposals get signed off by a research mentor, a research advisor, and the student and the mentor come to an agreement on the direction of the research. So within that, someone asked about AI and ML. Many of our faculty are interested in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so the trick here with any research topic will be identifying a faculty member who has a shared interest in the topic, or who has broad research expertise that will be suitable to guide you in doing your research on that topic. So the ideal mentor, I tell students, is someone with whom you have both shared interest in the topic and alignment of research methods, but practically speaking, one or other of those and a good interpersonal relationship will make for a good research mentor. Someone asked about what determines whether you are an executive. We do use the word executive as a way of capturing someone who has supervisory experience. Doesn't sound strong enough, but to the notion of will military service count? Absolutely. So I would say what we look for people who've had leadership responsibility, and sometimes it can be financial responsibility in that regard. We have had some people who come from the medical professional, and so their executive experience is having leadership responsibility for healthcare organizations or healthcare contexts. So I will say to you, a holistic definition of executive, it's not that you have to have chief executive in your title, but you will need to be seasoned in terms of our minimum experience requirement is 10 years. And then within that 10-year period, we do look for progression in terms of leadership and supervisory responsibility in that regard. Let's see. Is the program realistic for out of state? Absolutely. In fact, over half of our current cohort are non-local. We have people who travel in from Texas, from Seattle, from the East Coast. We have one lady who comes from London, another who's coming from Hamburg, and we have one gentleman coming from Vietnam. Because the schedule requires just these 3 one-week residentials per year for the first 2 years, that travel travel aspect requirement is very manageable in that regard. You do, however, need to be in a situation whereby you can commit to be here for those 1-week residentials. We give you the dates in advance, and then the expectation is that you are here and fully present for the entire residential. I'll let somebody else explain who Graziadio was, or happy to follow up on that later. So let me move on at this stage. I seem to have scanned down to the bottom of the questions there, but again, encourage you to continue posting those questions into the chat box. Someone asked a question about the difference between a PhD and a DBA. And excuse me a second while I take a sip of water. So what I have here is a slide that compares in their purest sense a traditional PhD and in its purest sense an executive DBA. So in the right-hand column, traditional PhDs I would say have been focused on what we call basic research or highly academic research. It's research that aims to develop new theory, and often that research is done in isolation of practice, in very scientific environments. That research is often done in labs in that regard. And so who's it done by? It's really done, traditional PhD programs are pursued by aspiring academics. They tend to be full-time programs for people who are interested in becoming full-time academics. Typically done by people that quite early on in their career, so that then they can graduate from the PhD program, go into the tenure track process, get tenure, and then have a full career in academia. And the nature of the research we've set up on top there is basic or applied or often quite theoretical, basic or theoretical research, not applied. The research that's written is often written for other academics and is typically published in academic journals, right? And so the whole motivation for going into a traditional PhD program is really to get that key credential that allows someone to move into an academic career. On the other hand, in its purest sense, an executive doctorate of business administration tends to be focused I go to the second row there, intellectually curious practitioners. Right? So DBA programs are for people who have already spent a considerable amount of time in practice and now have this curiosity about how business practice works, business or organizational practice in that regard. So therefore, targeted at people much later in their careers. I keep using this term, senior executives. And so our definition of that, as you'll see in a minute, are people who've got at least 10 years of executive experience. The nature of the research which is conducted tends to be more applied in nature. And so rather than developing new theory, most DBA dissertations focus on applying existing theory to a business problem, to practice. The application of theory to practice is really the focus of an executive DBA program. And the outcomes of that research then are typically the desire is to contribute and improve business practice. And the results themselves then tend to be written and shared in outlets that are read by business practitioners. Early on, I drew and mentioned Harvard Business Review a lot, other journals such as Harvard Business Review, like MIT Sloan Management Review, California Management Review, but there's a variety of publications that are open to publishing applied business research are possible conduits for the results that come from executive DBA research. But more broadly than that, even writing op-ed pieces or writing in professional journals and trade journals in that regard. The concept of the thought leader, some of our students aspire to writing white papers, writing books, and then embarking on a career of speaking and consulting around those books. And so at the bottom row there on the left-hand column talks about the motivation for the DBA student is to develop a more sophisticated expertise in a particular area of business practice that will somehow either advance their careers or enable a transition perhaps from a career as an executive into a career as a consultant, a speaker, and perhaps then part-time teaching. But we do not see the DBA as a path towards a tenure track position, certainly a tenure track position at schools that require academic research as a way of gaining tenure in that regard. Having put out those two columns there on the purest sense of the traditional PhD and the purest sense of the executive DBA, you need to be aware that in the marketplace today, there are all sorts of variants of both of these. There are some schools that offer an executive PhD, for example. And there are other DBA programs in some schools that are actually aimed for students who aspire to full-time careers as full-time academics. So there are mixtures across these things here. But I would certainly say in our case, our executive DBA is very much aims to address the features on the left side of the screen there in terms of that focus on applied research, a target audience, students who are experienced executives and who primarily seek to remain in practice or perhaps move to a role as a consultant, speaker, thought leader, and perhaps a role with some part-time teaching, or in Graziadio, what we call practitioner faculty in that regard. So I hope that helps to clarify that there. Who do we feel is an ideal student at Graziadio? We require a bachelor's degree in any discipline from an accredited university. We also require a business-related master's degree. You may have noticed in the curriculum, we do not teach any business subjects in this program. We assume that students already have, for example, an MBA or some other business-related master's degree. For people who are outside of that field, we also consider people with medical doctorates and law degrees, but who've actively been involved in an executive role within their organization. But the normal requirement is a business-related master's degree plus business experience. I've talked about the 10 plus years of executive experience. Not all of that necessarily has to be as an executive. We have some students in our program who've got a lot of experience as consultants. And our view there is that the type of work that they've done as consultants prepares them well for the nature of the analytical work in the doctoral program. So for sure, 10 years of work experience, and then we will look at the application and the nature of the work completed as we assess whether it, sort of the extent of executive experience that's within there, whether it's appropriate. We look for our students, a desire to establish sort of credibility as a subject matter expert and thought leader. And so in our application process, we ask you for a statement of your aspirations and your motivations for doing the DBA. And in part here, what we're trying to figure out is indeed whether the DBA is, you've thought about how the DBA is going to fit into your future career as a sort of subject matter expert in a particular field of business, in a particular specialized area, or as a thought leader in the future. We believe intellectual curiosity is really important here. There's a need for a thirst for knowledge, a need to, a desire to understand how things work and what makes things perhaps, or what could make things work better. There's a lot of reading, there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of conceptual thinking, there's a lot of data analysis, and there's a lot of writing. And so therefore, to be successful in this program, you ideally have to enjoy those, and certainly you should not fear any one of those elements there. On the conceptual thinking and the data analysis, again, you will have noticed from the curriculum, a lot of courses on research methods, so the analytical part, we will absolutely help you develop necessary skills there. And then the integrative research seminars really help you with your conceptual thinking. And the various assignments through the program will develop and build your writing expertise over time. A desire to share, to develop and share new knowledge. So this is the quintessential ultimate goal here, is for you to learn something important which should be shared with the world. So that sharing could be, as we said, in writing, it could be in terms of public speaking, and it could be in terms of blogging. A number of our students are already become very effective bloggers and accumulated followers in that regard around a particular subject matter. A lot of this is independent study. There's no doubt about it. Every doctoral program, most of the time you will spend will be by yourself, reading and writing and working through abstract concepts and trying to make sense of them. So self-discipline, self-motivation is going to be something that's really a good attribute for you to have to be successful in any doctoral program, including our own here too. And a respect for data, a respect for theory, a respect for evidence. It's fundamental. If you don't have a respect for data, theory, and evidence, then every moment of this program, I think you'll find it to be very challenging. So at the end of the day, the best scholar practitioners are the ones who believe in the strengths of data, theory, and evidence. And then we're also have a particular affinity for students who are well aligned with the mission of Pepperdine and well aligned with the mission of the Graziadio School within Pepperdine. That does not, to clarify, mean by any means that we are only interested in people who come from the Christian faith. On the contrary, what we are interested in people who appreciate the values that the university respects, and more broadly the mission of the Graziadio School itself. In that regard, in terms of desiring to follow models of leadership that make the world a better place. So here's a sample of the faculty who are most closely involved. In fact, everyone on this screen in front of you teaches in the DBA program. So these are the teaching faculty. And I'll encourage you to go to the DBA website and where you'll find more details about these professors and their backgrounds. But this is a stellar group of faculty who, as I said, come to us from all of the best universities around the world in many, and faculty who are really well known in their fields and well respected in their fields. You'll notice too, it includes one faculty member here, Kyle Murphy, who himself completed a DBA and is a practitioner faculty, a non-tenure track faculty member at Pepperdine in the area of strategy and entrepreneurship. And finally, just give me a sample of this, who's in our first cohort. So here's a sample of the students in our first cohort. You'll notice here that many of them are senior executives and hold titles that are consistent with that. You'll notice that they come from a variety of different industries, ranging from Sharifa, who works for the LA and Long Beach Port of America. Frank is now working in a consulting organization. There are some in private equity. Blair runs a mid-sized manufacturing company in Texas. Jolie is a consultant, and Anna works in the marketing area there as well. So I wanted to give you a flavor of the breadth of geography, the breadth of areas that our students come from, and the breadth of experience that they have in that regard. And I think this gets me to my slide on final questions, and we've got 7 minutes left before we get to the end here. So I'll go back to the chat window here and see what other questions we have. And I'll start with the most recent one. Do I consider the DBA to be an enabling accreditation to facilitate the solidification of candidates next evolution rather than someone seeking academia? So yes, Shelley, no, Stuart, I think that came from. I think that's a really nice way of defining it in terms of an enabling accreditation. And I think the notion of the DBA enabling the next phase of the student's career is exactly how we would position it. Again, our students have already completed a master's degree. We're building upon that. Our students have already accumulated a number of years of work experience and the expertise that has been amassed over that period. And so I would see the DBA as an opportunity for students to, at some level, reflect upon and integrate, structure all of the experiences that they have accumulated, but weave into that broader conceptual frameworks, relevant practical theories that might help to structure and augment and perhaps refine and extend the wisdom that an executive has accumulated over the years, and then both extend that into a level of robustness, perhaps, that will allow the student to stand up and truly articulate and argue the position that has sort of, and the conclusions that have emerged from the research, and then create both the credential, but I think also the confidence to move forward and leverage that deeper knowledge, that richer appreciation to sort of in various ways influence business practice, either as an executive, or perhaps as a thought leader, or perhaps as a consultant in that regard. But I think that notion of enabling credential is a really nice concept. Let's see here. So is the tenure requirement fairly strict? I will encourage anyone there who feels that you yourself have accumulated what you in your own mind think is equivalent to 10 years of executive experience. Reach out to Karen. She will certainly guide you through that. I will say to you, 10 years post-undergraduate, we don't have anybody who's in our program less than 10 years post-undergraduate. So 10 years of post-undergraduate experience certainly has been the norm so far. Some people have done their master's degree within that, of course. And then, as I say, we'll look at the nature of the experiences over that time. And as I mentioned before, some people actually have been in roles that did not necessarily have an executive title per se, but we are interested in evidence of leadership, evidence of seniority. So I see a question here about how would we compare our program versus some other programs here. I'm not familiar with the details of the programs at the two programs that are mentioned here. But I do think for any of you, as you look at and compare the programs that you're interested in, I do think the key features that I would say that you should be cognizant of is first of all, what's the history of the school with respect to applied research and the competencies and the familiarity of the faculty with doing really good applied research. I would say the other thing for you to look at is what's the history of the school of serving executive level students and sort of having the mindset and the philosophy and the care of executive level students. Beyond that, then, I think you've got to decide for yourself, are you looking for a program that will include more courses, sort of maybe functional area courses, Or are you interested in a program that really is focused on the dissertation and the doctoral level research itself and preparing you to do really robust doctoral level dissertation research in that regard? I think schedule, the differences in schedule is clearly something that will appeal to one student or not. How frequently do you want to be on campus? How frequently can you be on campus? Those are some other features I think that are well worth thinking about there too. And at some level, I think a key thing, ultimately, I will say for any doctoral student, the really key aspect is, as you look at the faculty, can you see faculty with whom you think you might align in the future? Faculty whose subject areas and whose research program aligns with the types of topics you're interested in. And maybe even beyond that in terms of sort of the nature of the work that they've done in terms of consulting that they've done or audiences that they've served. I think that's something that you really need to be cognizant of as well. How are we doing here? We're down to our last minute. I will keep scanning here, but I want to honor the 1 hour that you promised to give us and say to you, to sort of thanks very much for being with us. I do encourage you to reach out to Karen or I, and I'll put up her email address here in terms of next steps. Please follow up with Karen. Her email address and office number are there. More details on the program. If you haven't already looked at the website, then please visit the website. The fastest way of finding that is to Google or search your favorite search engine. I should be saying Google Pepperdine Executive DBA. And then I'll invite you to reach out to me as well if you wish. And I'm simply john.mooney@pepperdine.edu. So we've hit our hour here. I will stay on for a while and see if there's any other questions I can help with. But again, thank you so much for being with us. And I do look forward to the possibility of interacting with you, and even more so to the possibility of welcoming you to the Malibu campus this coming September as a member of the 2019 cohort of the Pepperdine Graziadio DBA. Thanks very much for being with us. Bye-bye.